The flashing lights in the rearview mirror came as no surprise. They were inevitable. On a lonely stretch of U.S. Highway 59 just outside Houston, the law didn't always follow the book. It followed the whims of men with badges and grudges. The man behind the wheel of the sleek black sedan didn't panic. He simply adjusted his tie, checked his watch, and watched the officer strut toward his window with a hand resting ominously on his holster. This wasn't just a traffic stop. It was a collision of two worlds. One man thought he held all the power because of the uniform he wore. The other knew he held the power because of who he was. Badges would be stripped, careers would be incinerated, and Officer Brad Jenkins would wish he had never turned on his sirens. The humidity in Texas was heavy enough to wear like a coat. It clung to the windshield of the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, fighting a losing battle against the sedan's aggressive air conditioning. Inside, Calvin Brooks sat in comfortable silence, the soft hum of jazz filling the cabin. He had the kind of face that had seen everything. Hard lines etched around eyes that were currently fixed on the rearview mirror. Blue and red lights danced off the leather interior. Calvin sighed, a sound more of exhaustion than fear. He tapped the brakes, guiding the heavy car to the gravel shoulder of the highway. He put the car in park, killed the engine, and rolled all four windows down. It was a routine he knew better than the lyrics to the song playing on the radio. Hands on the wheel, 10 and 2, fingers spread. In the side mirror, he watched the patrol car door open. A boot hit the gravel, followed by a man who looked like he had been carved out of sourdough and resentment. Officer Brad Jenkins adjusted his belt, the leather creaking audibly in the quiet afternoon. He was a man of average height, but compensated with a puffed-out chest and a stride that suggested he owned the pavement he walked on. He was a veteran of the force, a tenure marked not by commendations, but by the sheer number of complaints that had mysteriously vanished from his file. Jenkins approached the vehicle on the passenger side. First peering in through the open window, he saw the expensive suit jacket hanging in the back, the leather briefcase, and the pristine cleanliness of the interior. He sneered. In Jenkins' mind, a car like this belonged to a lawyer, a doctor, or a criminal. And looking at the man in the driver's seat, Jenkins had already decided which one it was. He circled around to the driver's side. He didn't speak immediately. He just stood there, leaning down, chewing on a piece of gum with an irritating, wet smacking sound. "Afternoon," Jenkins finally drawled, though the tone suggested it was anything but. "Good afternoon, officer," Calvin replied. His voice was a deep baritone, steady and devoid of the nervous tremors Jenkins usually feasted on. "You know how fast you were going back there. I had my cruise control set to 65, officer. The limit is 65. Jenkins smirked, tipping his sunglasses down to look Calvin in the eye. "Is that right?" "Well, my radar says otherwise. Plus, you swerved. Failure to maintain a lane. That's probable cause right there." Calvin didn't argue. He knew the game. Arguments were fuel for men like Jenkins. "I apologize if I gave that impression. My registration and license are in the glove compartment. May I reach for them?" Jenkins rested his hand on the butt of his service weapon. The retention strap was already undone. Slowly, 2 fingers. Calvin moved with the precision of a surgeon. He pinched the latch, opened the compartment, and retrieved a leather wallet. He slid his license and registration onto the dashboard. Jenkins snatched them up. He looked at the ID. Calvin J. Brooks, Washington, D.C. address. "D.C., huh?" Jenkins scoffed, looking back at the car. "Long way from home. What brings a guy like you down here in a ride like this? You running drugs? Maybe moving cash for the cartels?" The accusation was blunt, ugly, and practiced. It was a hook baited with insult, waiting for a reaction. Calvin remained impassive. "I'm here on federal business, officer. I suggest you check the registration properly." Jenkins laughed, a dry, hacking bark. "Federal business, right? And I'm the King of England. Step out of the car." "Officer, I have not committed a crime. Unless you're placing me under arrest, I prefer to stay in the vehicle." "I said step out of the car," Jenkins shouted, his hand gripping the door handle. He yanked it open. "I smell marijuana. That gives me the right to search this vehicle and your person. Now get out before I drag you out." There was no smell of marijuana. The car smelled of new leather and expensive cologne. But "I smell weed" was the magic key that unlocked everything Jenkins wanted to do. Calvin unbuckled his seatbelt. He turned his body and placed one foot on the gravel, rising to his full height. He stood 6'3", towering over the officer. Jenkins took a reflexive step back, intimidated by the sheer physical presence of the man before his anger surged to cover his insecurity. "Turn around," Jenkins barked. "Hands on the hood." Calvin complied. The metal was hot against his palms. "Officer Jenkins," Calvin said, reading the nameplate, "I'm required to inform you that I am armed. My weapon is holstered on my right hip, and I have a badge in my breast pocket." Jenkins froze. "Gun!" he screamed, panic mixing with adrenaline. He drew his weapon and jammed the barrel into the back of Calvin's skull. "Don't you move. You move and I'll blow your head off." "I'm not moving," Calvin said, his voice dropping an octave and becoming colder. "I'm informing you of my status as a federal agent." "Shut up!" Jenkins slammed Calvin's face down onto the hot hood of the Mercedes. He reached around, ripping Calvin's jacket open, and found the firearm, a standard-issue Glock 19. He yanked it from the holster and tossed it into the dirt as if it were trash. "You're in a heap of trouble now, boy," Jenkins hissed into Calvin's ear. "Impersonating an officer, possession of a firearm, resisting arrest. I'm going to bury you under the jail." Calvin turned his head slightly, his cheek pressed against the burning metal. "Officer Jenkins, look at the badge in my pocket. Look at it." "I don't care about your fake badge." Jenkins grabbed a pair of cuffs from his belt. He wrenched Calvin's arms behind his back, twisting the left shoulder to the point of straining the rotator cuff. The metal ratcheted tight, biting into Calvin's wrists. "You are making a mistake that will cost you your pension," Calvin said quietly. Jenkins shoved him hard, forcing him to stumble toward the patrol car. "The only mistake I made was being nice enough to ask you to step out. Get in the back." As Jenkins shoved Calvin into the cramped plastic back seat of the cruiser, he didn't notice the small red LED blinking on the dash cam of the Mercedes. He didn't notice that Calvin hadn't looked at him with fear, but with the calculation of a predator watching prey walk into a trap. Jenkins slammed the door and walked back to the Mercedes. He began to tear it apart. He threw the briefcase onto the road. He ripped the contents of the glove box out. He was looking for anything: drugs, cash, a stolen weapon, anything to justify the feeling in his gut that he had bitten off more than he could chew. He found nothing, just files. Thick, redacted files stamped with seals he didn't recognize. He kicked the briefcase. "Must be a mule," he muttered to himself. "A high-end mule." He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Alpha. I've got one in custody. Requesting a tow for a suspicious vehicle and get the K9 unit out here. I know there's dope in this car." The ride to the precinct was a masterclass in unprofessionalism. Jenkins drove with one hand on the wheel and the other holding his phone, texting his buddies about the big collar he had just made. He blasted talk radio, a host screaming about conspiracies and border walls, while occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror to gloat. "You quiet back there, tough guy," Jenkins taunted. "Thinking about what you're going to tell your cellmate." Calvin sat upright despite the discomfort of the handcuffs digging into his lumbar spine. "I'm thinking about the chain of command, Officer Jenkins. I'm thinking about Captain Tom Riley." Jenkins nearly swerved. "How do you know the captain?" "I know a lot of people," Calvin said. "I know that Captain Riley is nearing retirement and has high blood pressure. I know he hates it when his officers bring heat down on the department. And you, Officer Jenkins, are bringing a forest fire." "Shut your mouth," Jenkins snapped, but the confidence wavered slightly. He turned up the radio to drown out the voice of reason from the back seat. They pulled into the station Sallyport. The station was a blocky concrete eyesore built in the 70s, smelling of stale coffee and floor wax. Jenkins hauled Calvin out of the car, parading him through the booking area like a trophy deer. Other officers looked up from their desks. Most looked bored, but a few exchanged glances. They saw the suit. They saw the posture. They saw that this wasn't the usual drunk driver or petty thief Jenkins dragged in. "What you got there, Brad?" asked Sergeant Mike Sullivan, a man whose belly strained against the buttons of his uniform shirt. He was eating a donut, powdered sugar dusting his mustache. "Felony stop," Jenkins announced loudly. "Speeding, resisting, illegal possession of a firearm. Guy claims he's a Fed." Sullivan paused the donut halfway to his mouth. He looked at Calvin. He looked at the calm, icy rage in Calvin's eyes. "Did you verify it?" "Verify what? The fake badge he bought online?" Jenkins laughed. "I tossed his piece in the dirt. I'm booking him." Calvin spoke up, his voice echoing in the booking room. I am Assistant Director Calvin Brooks of the Federal Bureau of Investigation Internal Inspection Division. My badge number is 8842. If you do not unhand me and allow me to make a call to your captain immediately, you will be named as a co-conspirator in a federal kidnapping charge." The room went silent, the type of silence where you can hear a fluorescent light bulb hum. Sullivan slowly put the donut down. He wiped his hands on a napkin. "Brad, show me the badge." "Show me, Sarge, come on. He's full of it. Show me the damn badge, Brad." Sullivan roared, standing up. Jenkins rolled his eyes, digging into his pocket where he had stuffed Calvin's wallet. He threw it onto the booking counter. Sullivan opened it. He stared at the gold shield. He stared at the holographic watermark. He stared at the federal ID card tucked behind it. Sullivan's face drained of color. He looked up at Calvin, then at Jenkins. "Brad, uncuff him." "What? Sarge, it's a fake. Look at him. He doesn't look like a—" "I said uncuff him now," Sullivan shouted, coming around the desk. "That is a real federal badge, you idiot. That is the Assistant Director of the FBI. Jenkins froze. The world tilted on its axis. He looked at the man in the handcuffs, the man who hadn't screamed, the man who hadn't fought, the man who had waited. I, Jenkins stammered. "Key," Calvin demanded, his voice like a whip crack. "Now!" Jenkins fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them. They clattered loudly on the linoleum floor. Calvin didn't look down. He kept his eyes locked on Jenkins's face. "Pick them up." Jenkins bent down, humiliation burning his neck red. He retrieved the keys and unlocked the cuffs. Calvin rubbed his wrists, grimacing slightly. He adjusted his suit jacket, brushing off imaginary dust. "Sergeant Sullivan," Calvin said, turning to the desk. "Sergeant, I want my firearm retrieved from the side of the highway where this officer threw it. I want my vehicle towed here immediately without a single scratch on it, and I want Captain Riley in this room right away." "Yes, sir, right away, sir." Sullivan was already reaching for the phone, dialing with frantic speed. Jenkins stood there, stripped of his power, looking small and pathetic. I didn't know. You didn't say." "I told you exactly who I was," Calvin said, stepping into Jenkins's personal space. Calvin smelled of expensive oud wood and absolute authority. "You just didn't want to hear it because it didn't fit the story you were telling yourself. You saw a black man in a nice car, and you saw a target. Well, Officer Jenkins, you missed, and now the target is locking onto you." The door to the precinct flew open. Captain Tom Riley stormed in, looking like he had run all the way from his office. He took one look at Calvin, one look at the pale, sweating Jenkins, and closed his eyes in defeat. "Director Brooks," Riley said, his voice tight. I'm so sorry. I had no idea you were in our jurisdiction." "I was passing through, Captain," Calvin said smoothly. "I was on my way to a joint task force meeting in Austin regarding police corruption in the southern districts. Ironically, I seem to have found a case study right here in your department." Jenkins looked at his captain, pleading with his eyes. "Cap? I thought he was resisting. I smelled weed." "Did you find any?" Calvin asked sharply. "No." "But did you find any drugs in my car?" "No." "Did you verify my license before you dragged me out?" Jenkins looked at the floor. "Get his badge," Calvin ordered. Riley tried to mediate. "Director, maybe we can discuss this in my office." "There is nothing to discuss," Calvin said. "This officer assaulted a federal agent. He falsified probable cause. He deprived me of my civil rights under color of law. Title 18, U.S. Code Section 242. If you do not strip him of his badge right now, Captain, I will have the DOJ down here so fast your head will spin, and I will start the investigation with your file." Riley didn't hesitate. He turned to Jenkins. "Give it over, Brad. Badge and gun on the desk now. You're suspended pending an internal investigation." Jenkins's hands trembled as he unclipped his holster. He placed his Glock on the counter. Then, with agonizing slowness, he unpinned the silver shield from his chest. The pin pricked his finger, drawing a drop of blood that smeared on the metal. He laid it down. "Go home," Riley said. Jenkins turned to leave, a dead man walking. "Not so fast," Calvin said. Jenkins stopped. "You're not going home," Calvin said, pulling a cell phone from his pocket. "I just got off the phone with the local FBI field office. They are on the way." "You aren't suspended, Mr. Jenkins. You are under arrest." The interrogation room at the precinct was a stark contrast to the luxury of Calvin's Mercedes. It was a box of gray cinder blocks smelling of ammonia and despair. But for the first time in his career, Brad Jenkins wasn't the one standing over the table intimidating a suspect. He was the one sitting in the metal chair, his hands cuffed to the table, staring at the scratched surface. The door buzzed and swung open. Jenkins looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. In walked Frank Miller. Frank Miller was the attorney for the Police Benevolent Association, the union representative who had made a career out of keeping badges on the street. He was a man composed entirely of sharp angles and cheap polyester. He walked in with the swagger of a man who knew where all the bodies were buried because he had usually handed over the shovels. "Don't say a word, Brad," Miller barked, dropping a heavy leather briefcase onto the table. He didn't look at Jenkins. He looked straight at the one-way mirror, knowing exactly who was watching from the other side. Not a single word. Jenkins slumped with relief. "Frank, thank God. They took my gun, Frank. They took my shield." "They're going to give them back," Miller said, his voice loud enough to be heard in the observation room. "This is a misunderstanding, a clerical error. You made a traffic stop. The suspect became belligerent, and you followed protocol to secure the scene. Standard operating procedure." "He's a Fed, Frank," Jenkins whispered, his voice cracking. "He's an assistant director." Miller paused. He looked at Jenkins, his eyes narrowing. "So being a Fed doesn't give him a license to break traffic laws. It doesn't give him a license to resist a lawful order. We're going to countersue. Unlawful detainment, emotional distress. We'll paint him as an arrogant bureaucrat who thinks he's above the law." The door opened again. This time it wasn't a local cop. Calvin Brooks walked in. He had removed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing thick forearms and a calmness that was terrifying. He carried a single manila folder. "Mr. Miller," Calvin said, his voice smooth, "I've heard of you. You represented Officer Garrett back when he broke that teenager's jaw. You got him off with a 2-week suspension." Miller sneered. "I represent the brave men and women of this force against harassment, and right now, Director Brooks, you are harassing my client. I want him released immediately. You have no jurisdiction here. This is a state matter." Calvin pulled out a chair and sat down opposite them. He didn't look at Miller. He looked at Jenkins. "Brad," Calvin said, using his first name, "do you know what RICO is?" Jenkins blinked. "Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." "Very good," Calvin nodded. "Usually reserved for the mob, but lately the DOJ has found it very useful for police departments that operate like criminal gangs." "Watch your mouth," Miller snapped. "I won't have you slandering this department." Calvin ignored him. He opened the folder. He slid a photo across the table. It was a grainy surveillance shot of Jenkins standing in a parking lot accepting an envelope from a known local drug dealer named Reggie Little King. Jenkins' face went the color of ash. That's an informant payment," Jenkins stammered. "Is it?" Calvin slid another paper across. "Because this is your bank statement. 3 days after that photo was taken, you made a cash deposit of $5,000. That's a lot of overtime, Brad." Miller tried to snatch the papers, but Calvin slapped his hand down on them. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. "Touch evidence in a federal investigation, Mr. Miller, and you'll be in the cell next to him," Calvin said. His eyes were cold fire. "Investigation?" Miller faltered. "What investigation? You think I was driving down U.S. Highway 59 by accident?" Calvin leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I wasn't passing through, Brad. I was hunting. We've been building a file on the precinct for months. The drug skimming, the evidence tampering, the excessive force complaints that Mr. Miller here makes disappear." Calvin sat back, crossing his arms. "I was coming to town to brief the U.S. attorney on the indictments. I just needed one more piece of the puzzle. I needed to see the arrogance up close, and then you turned on your lights." Jenkins looked at Miller, panic seizing his chest. "Frank, you said you could fix this." Miller was backing away from the table, his confidence evaporating. I need to review these documents. I need to make some calls." "You do that," Calvin said. "But do it outside because my team is here." As if on cue, the heavy steel door of the precinct's sally port slammed open outside. Through the thin walls, they heard the distinct heavy tread of boots, lots of them. "FBI, nobody move. Hands away from your keyboards." The shouting from the bullpen was audible in the interrogation room. Jenkins flinched. Calvin stood up. "That would be Special Agent Sloan and the Mobile Corruption Task Force. They're seizing the servers, Brad. They're seizing the dash cam footage archives. They're seizing your locker. Calvin looked down at the disgraced officer. You profiled me because you thought I was a criminal. The irony is, I'm the only one in this room who follows the law. You're not a cop anymore, Jenkins. You're a suspect in a federal racketeering case, and your friend Frank here, he can't save you from the United States government. Miller grabbed his briefcase and fled the room, leaving Jenkins alone with the wolf he had tried to cage. Some time had passed since the arrest, but for Brad Jenkins, it felt like an eternity. He was out on bail, confined to his house with an ankle monitor that blinked a mocking green light every few seconds. The suspension was officially without pay now. The union, realizing the radioactive nature of the federal RICO charges, had quietly distanced itself. Frank Miller wasn't returning his calls. Jenkins sat on his worn-out recliner, staring at the television. The local news was playing a loop of the dashcam footage from Calvin's Mercedes. The footage was crystal clear. It showed the beautiful Texas highway. It showed the blue lights and the audio. The audio was the nail in the coffin. Must be a mule, a high-end mule. I'm going to bury you under the jail. Jenkins watched himself on screen, hearing the hate in his own voice. He looked small, petty. Turn it off, his wife Lisa said from the kitchen doorway. She looked tired. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She was holding a stack of envelopes, bills they couldn't pay. They edited it, Jenkins muttered, reaching for a beer. They cut out the part where he was reaching. Brad, Lisa said, her voice trembling. I watched the whole video. He didn't reach. He told you who he was 3 times. He was baiting me. It was a trap. Jenkins slammed his beer on the coaster. He set me up. You set yourself up, Lisa screamed, throwing the bills onto the floor. You always do this. You think you're God because you have a badge? Well, guess what? The bank doesn't care about your badge. The neighbors aren't waving at us anymore. Brad, someone threw a brick through the window last night. My sister won't let me bring the kids over. Jenkins stared at her, stunned. Lisa had always been his defender. She was the blue Lives Matter sticker on the minivan. She was the one who baked cookies for the precinct. I'm fighting this, Jenkins said, his voice hollow. When we get to court, the jury will understand. They know what it's like out there. They know I have to make split-second decisions. There is no jury, Brad, Lisa said, crying now. Scott called. Officer Scott Murphy, Jenkins' partner for years, the man he had barbecued with, the man who had helped him plant a throwaway piece on a suspect back in the day. What did Scott say? Jenkins asked, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He cut a deal? Lisa whispered. The feds offered him immunity. He's testifying against you, Brad. He gave them everything. The drug money, the falsified reports, everything. Jenkins felt the room spin. Scott was the weak link. Scott knew about the skimming operation. If Scott was talking, it wasn't just a brutality charge anymore. It was prison time, real federal prison time. The phone rang. It wasn't the landline. It was his burner cell, the one he thought the feds didn't know about. He picked it up. Yeah, a voice hissed. It was Captain Riley. He sounded like he was calling from inside a closet. Don't say my name, Cap. What's going on? You've got to help me. Help you? You sunk us all, you idiot. Riley's voice was a mixture of fury and terror. Brooks isn't stopping with you. He's going after the pension fund. He's looking at the command structure. I'm being forced into early retirement effective soon. They're talking about dissolving the entire precinct and letting the sheriff's department take over. But listen to me, Riley snapped. You are on your own. If you mention my name to the feds, if you try to drag me down, remember that you have family in this town and accidents happen. The line went dead. Jenkins stared at the phone, the brotherhood, the thin blue line. It had dissolved the moment the heat got too high. He wasn't a brother anymore. He was a liability. He looked at Lisa, who was sobbing on the couch. He looked at the TV where a pundit was discussing the Brooks case as a turning point in civil rights litigation. The doorbell rang. Jenkins jumped. He went to the window and peered through the blinds. It wasn't the police. It wasn't reporters. It was a process server, a young woman holding a thick stack of documents. Jenkins opened the door. Bradford Jenkins? She asked. Yeah. You've been served, she said, handing him the stack. Civil suit, Calvin Brooks versus Bradford Jenkins, the city of Houston and the Houston Police Department. Jenkins looked at the cover page. He wasn't just being sued for damages. Calvin Brooks was suing for malicious prosecution and defamation, and at the bottom in bold text was the name of the law firm representing Brooks. Sterling Vance and Associates, the most expensive, ruthless civil rights firm in New York. Brooks wasn't just using the DOJ to put Jenkins in prison. He was using his own private wealth to ensure that even if Jenkins ever got out, he would be destitute for the rest of his life. Jenkins dropped the papers on the porch. He looked out at the street. His patrol car, which used to be parked in the driveway, was gone. His friends were gone. His career was gone. And then he saw it. Cruising slowly past his house was a black Mercedes-Benz S-Class. The windows were tinted dark, but for a brief second, the rear window rolled down. Calvin Brooks sat there. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just looked at Jenkins, standing on his porch in his stained t-shirt and sweatpants. He looked at him with the impassive judgment of a man who had warned him. "You are making a mistake that will cost you your pension." The window rolled up. The Mercedes drove away, disappearing down the street. Jenkins fell to his knees on the welcome mat. The weight of his own karma had finally crushed him. The United States District Court for the Southern District of Texas was a cathedral of mahogany and silence. It was a place designed to make individuals feel small, and today Brad Jenkins felt microscopic. He sat at the defense table wearing a suit he had bought at a discount outlet days prior. It fit poorly, tight in the shoulders and loose at the waist, a physical manifestation of how much weight he had lost in the last month. Next to him sat his court-appointed attorney, Larry Weiss. Weiss was a capable lawyer, but he had the tired eyes of a man who knew he was bringing a knife to a nuclear war. Across the aisle, the prosecution table was a fortress. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Bennett sat with perfect posture, organizing her files with lethal precision. Behind her in the gallery sat Calvin Brooks. Calvin didn't look like a victim. He looked like the owner of the building. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit, his expression unreadable as he watched the proceedings. He wasn't there to testify that day. He had already given his deposition. He was there to witness the end. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Patricia Grant swept into the room. She was a legend in the circuit, a woman known for her intellect and her absolute intolerance for theatrics. She took her seat, her gaze sweeping over the courtroom before landing heavily on Jenkins. "Be seated," she commanded. "We are here for the sentencing phase and final arguments in United States versus Jenkins. Mr. Weiss, is your client prepared?" "He is, Your Honor," Weiss muttered. The trial itself had been a bloodbath. The evidence was overwhelming. The cloud-synced dash cam footage from Calvin's Mercedes had been played for the jury in high resolution. Every sneer, every racial slur, every abuse of power was broadcast in high definition. But the real twist, the dagger in the back that Jenkins hadn't seen coming, was the testimony of his former partner. The prosecution called their star witness. The government calls Scott Murphy. Jenkins flinched. The doors opened and Scott Murphy walked in. He wasn't in uniform. He wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks. He refused to look at Jenkins. Murphy took the stand. He was sworn in. "Mr. Murphy," USA Bennett began, pacing slowly in front of the jury box. "You were Officer Jenkins's partner for years, correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Murphy said, his voice quiet. "Tell the jury about the traffic stop." Murphy took a deep breath. "It wasn't a random stop. We were sitting in the speed trap near the county line. Officer Jenkins saw the Mercedes go by. He didn't check the speed. He just said, 'Look at that ride. Bet you $10 the driver doesn't match the car.'" A ripple of murmurs went through the jury. "Did you observe the defendant commit any traffic violations?" Bennett asked. "No, ma'am." The car was centered. He was doing the limit. "So why did Officer Jenkins initiate the stop?" Murphy looked down at his hands. "He said he wanted to shake the tree and see what falls out. He said, 'Guys in cars like that always have cash to seize.' He called it a retirement fund stop." Jenkins slammed his hand on the table. "Liar!" he screamed, standing up. "You're a lying rat, Murphy. You took the same money I did." "Sit down, Mr. Jenkins." Judge Grant's gavel banged like a thunderclap. "One more outburst and I will have you gagged." Weiss yanked Jenkins back into his chair. "Shut up, Brad," he hissed. "You're digging the hole deeper," Murphy continued, tears welling in his eyes. "He's right. I did take the money. That's why I'm here. That's why I pled guilty." But Brad enjoyed it. When he found out Mr. Brooks was a Fed, he didn't stop. He panicked, but then he got angry. In the holding cell before the captain arrived, Brad told me, "If we plant the throwaway piece in his trunk, it's his word against ours. Who's a jury going to believe, a cop or a black man from D.C.?" The courtroom went dead silent. The throwaway piece, the ghost gun every corrupt cop kept for emergencies. Calvin Brooks didn't blink. He just made a small note in a leather-bound notebook. "Thank you, Mr. Murphy," Bennett said softly. "No further questions." As Murphy walked past the defense table, Jenkins whispered, "You're dead, Scott." Murphy paused. He looked at Jenkins with pity, not fear. "No, Brad, I'm free. You're the one who's dead." The defense rested without calling witnesses. What could they say? The character witnesses had all pulled out. Even Captain Riley had submitted a written affidavit condemning Jenkins's actions to save his own pension, though Calvin's team was already building a separate indictment for him. Judge Grant looked at the jury. "The jury has reached a verdict." The foreman, an older man with glasses, stood up. "We have, Your Honor." Publish the verdict. On count 1, deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant Bradford Jenkins guilty. On count 2, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, guilty. On count 3, obstruction of justice, guilty. On count 4, false imprisonment, guilty. Every guilty was a hammer blow. Jenkins felt his breath leaving him. He looked back at the gallery, searching for Lisa. She wasn't there. The seat reserved for his family was empty. The sentencing hearing took place later. Jenkins stood before Judge Grant. He was no longer in a suit. He was in an orange federal jumpsuit, chains around his waist and ankles. The transformation was complete. The predator was now the prey. "Mr. Jenkins," Judge Grant said, peering over her spectacles, "I have sat on this bench for years. I have sent murderers, rapists, and terrorists to prison, but nothing turns my stomach quite like a corrupt police officer." Jenkins looked at the floor. "You were given a badge," she continued, her voice trembling with controlled rage. "A symbol of trust, and you used it as a weapon to terrorize the very people you were sworn to protect. You targeted Mr. Brooks, not because of what he did, but because of who he was. You assumed that because he was a black man in a luxury car, he was a criminal, and when you realized you were wrong, you tried to destroy him rather than admit your mistake." She picked up a document. "The pre-sentencing report suggests a range of 15 to 20 years. However, given the egregious nature of the betrayal of public trust and your lack of remorse shown during the trial," Judge Grant leaned forward, "I sentence you to 25 years in a federal correctional institution without the possibility of parole. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $250,000 to the victim." Jenkins's knees buckled. The marshals grabbed him by the arms to hold him up. He would be an old man when he got out, if he survived. "Director Brooks," Judge Grant said, looking at the gallery, "would you like to make a statement?" Calvin stood up. The courtroom quieted. He walked to the podium, his gait steady. He didn't look at the judge. He turned and looked directly at Jenkins. "I don't want his money," Calvin said, his voice filling the room. "I want him to know something. Brad, look at me." Jenkins raised his tear-streaked face. "You asked me on the side of the road what I was doing in Texas." Calvin said, "I told you I was on federal business, but I didn't tell you the project." Calvin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I was down here to finalize the funding for the Equal Justice Initiative. It's a scholarship program for young men and women from underprivileged neighborhoods in Houston who want to enter law enforcement. We pay for their college, their academy training, and place them in precincts like yours." Calvin smiled, a cold, sharp expression. "You tried to bury me, Brad, but all you did was give me the shovel to dig up the rot in your department. Because of you, Captain Riley is being indicted soon. Because of you, the precinct is being restructured, and because of you, the next generation of officers on these streets will look nothing like you." Calvin turned back to the judge. "The restitution money he owes me, I would like to donate it immediately to the public defender's office to help those who weren't lucky enough to have a badge and a gun to fight back." "So ordered," Judge Grant said, banging the gavel. "Take him away." The marshals dragged Jenkins out. As he was pulled through the side door, he looked back one last time. He saw Calvin Brooks shaking hands with the prosecutor. He saw the respect in the room. He saw the power, and he realized with a sickening jolt that he had never been the law. He had just been a bully with a permission slip, and the teacher had just revoked it. The transport van smelled of sweat and diesel. Jenkins was chained to a bench in the back. Across from him sat a young kid, maybe 20, with tattoos on his neck. The kid looked at Jenkins. He looked at the orange jumpsuit. He looked at the way Jenkins held himself, the ghost of the cop still clinging to him. "You a cop?" the kid asked. "Yeah," Jenkins croaked. "What you in for?" Jenkins opened his mouth to lie, to say it was fraud or taxes, but he was too tired. "I was a cop," Jenkins whispered. The kid smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "A cop in general population, man. You're going to have a long ride." The van lurched forward, taking Brad Jenkins toward a concrete box where his badge meant nothing and his past meant everything. The heavy steel doors of the federal prison awaited, ready to swallow him whole. Federal Correctional Institution in Beaumont, Texas was not the country club Jenkins had convinced himself it would be. It was a medium security facility. But for a former police officer, the security level didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the ratio, one of him and 1,600 of them. Jenkins was processed into Unit B. The intake officer, a burly man named Officer Grimes, didn't offer any professional courtesy. He tossed Jenkins a thin mattress and a hygiene kit. "Don't get comfortable, 4482, Grimes muttered, using Jenkins's prisoner ID number. "We're short on isolation cells, so you're in general population for a while until the warden signs off on protective custody. Keep your head down." General population. The words hit Jenkins like a physical blow. A cop in Gen Pop was a lamb in a slaughterhouse. He walked into the cell block. It was a cavernous space echoing with shouting, the clanging of steel, and the oppressive smell of bodies and bleach. As he walked past the cells on the second tier, the noise didn't stop. But the tone changed. The casual shouting turned into low, predatory whistling. "I smell bacon," someone shouted. "Fresh pork on the block," another voice echoed. Jenkins kept his eyes on the concrete floor, clutching his mattress like a shield. He found his assigned cell 214. It was already occupied. Sitting on the bottom bunk was a massive man with shoulders that spanned the width of the bed. He was reading a paperback book, wearing wire-rimmed glasses. He looked up as Jenkins hesitated in the doorway. "Top bunk," the man said. His voice was calm, deep, and terrifyingly educated. Jenkins threw his mattress up and climbed the ladder. He lay there staring at the graffiti scratched into the ceiling. "God hates us all. Rico was here." "You're the cop," the man below said. It wasn't a question. "I was a cop," Jenkins corrected, his voice trembling. "Past tense doesn't matter in here," the man said. He closed his book. "My name is Big Mike. You put my cousin away years ago, planted drug paraphernalia in his car during a stop on Westheimer Road." Jenkins's heart stopped. He remembered Westheimer Road. He remembered a lot of stops on Westheimer Road. I don't know what you're talking about," Jenkins whispered. "It doesn't matter if you remember," Big Mike said, turning off the small clip-on light. "Because everyone in here remembers you. You're famous, Jenkins. That dash cam footage was on the TV in the rec room every day for a while. We all watched you. We all heard you. Must be a mule. I'm going to bury you." Big Mike chuckled in the dark. "You buried yourself, Brad, and now you're in the dirt with the rest of us." The next morning, the accidents began. At breakfast, Jenkins reached for a tray. A hand slapped it away. He looked up to see a man with a spiderweb tattoo on his neck. "That's reserved," the man hissed. Jenkins moved to the next stack, slapped away again. He didn't eat that morning. In the yard, he tried to stay near the guards, but the guards, sensing the radioactive nature of his presence, seemed to drift away whenever he got close. They didn't want to be caught in the crossfire. The blue wall of silence didn't exist inside the fences. Here, the guards viewed corrupt cops as worse than criminals. They made the job harder for everyone. Jenkins found a spot on a bench near the basketball courts. He tried to make himself invisible. "Hey, Officer Friendly!" A basketball slammed into Jenkins's chest hard enough to knock the wind out of him. He gasped, clutching his ribs. 3 men surrounded him. One of them was Kevin T-Bone Carter, a low-level enforcer Jenkins had arrested twice. "You look lost." Carter smiled, showing gold teeth. "You look like you need to call for backup. Go ahead, call him." Jenkins stood up, backing away. "I don't want any trouble." "You are trouble," Carter said. He stepped in close. "You know how much it cost me to get a lawyer for that charge?" You trumped up 5 grand. My mama had to sell her car. I was doing my job, Jenkins stammered, falling back on the only defense he knew. Carter punched him. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a calculated shot to the solar plexus. Jenkins folded like a lawn chair, dropping to the asphalt, gasping for air that wouldn't come. That was your job out there, Carter whispered, leaning down. My job in here is teaching you the new rules. Rule number 1, you don't have a badge anymore. You're just meat. Carter kicked him in the ribs. Jenkins curled into a ball, covering his head. He waited for the swarm, for the beating that would kill him. Break it up. Move it. A siren blared. The guards finally intervened, jogging over with pepper spray canisters drawn. Carter and his crew backed off, hands raised in mock innocence. He tripped, boss, Carter laughed. Clumsy pig. Jenkins lay on the ground, dirt in his mouth, tears leaking from his eyes. He looked up at the guard standing over him. It was a young officer, maybe in his early 20s. Get up, inmate, the guard said coldly. He didn't offer a hand. Jenkins scrambled to his feet. You're going to the SHU, Segregated Housing Unit, the guard said. Protective custody came through. You're lucky. Lucky. Jenkins was marched to a solitary cell, 6 feet by 8 feet. No window, just a steel door with a slot. He sat on the bed. The silence was heavier than the noise of the yard. In the silence, he couldn't run from the thoughts. He couldn't run from the image of Calvin Brooks's face in the rearview mirror. He had spent years putting men in cages. Now he was in the smallest cage of all, and he realized with a terrifying clarity he wasn't going to survive his sentence. He probably wouldn't survive long. Later, the Texas sun was just as hot as it had been on that fateful day on U.S. Highway 59, but the landscape of the city had changed. In the heart of Houston, a ribbon-cutting ceremony was taking place. A crowd of hundreds had gathered, city officials, community leaders, and families. Calvin Brooks stood at the podium. He had aged gracefully. The gray at his temples only added to his authority. He wasn't wearing a suit that day. He was wearing a polo shirt with a logo on the chest. The Brooks Initiative for Justice. Behind him stood a new building. It was a community center and a legal aid clinic built on the site of a former derelict warehouse. Thank you all for coming, Calvin said, his voice amplified across the parking lot. Some time ago I came to this city and faced the worst of what power can do when it goes unchecked. I met a man who thought his authority gave him the right to strip away my dignity. The crowd murmured in agreement. Everyone knew the story. It had become local folklore. But out of that darkness, Calvin continued, we built this light. Today, the Houston Police Department has a new civilian oversight board. Today, we have new officers on the beat who graduated from our scholarship program. Officers who know that their strength comes from their community, not their holsters. He gestured to the side of the stage. A group of young officers in dress uniforms stood at attention. They were diverse, black, white, Hispanic, Asian. They looked proud. We didn't just win a lawsuit, Calvin said. We changed the culture. We proved that justice isn't just a word lawyers use. It's an action. It's a verb. The applause was thunderous. In the back of the crowd, a woman watched. It was Lisa Jenkins. She looked different. She had lost weight, cut her hair short, and wasn't wearing her wedding ring. She was holding the hand of a new man, a kind-looking guy who worked at the local hardware plant. She watched Calvin speak with a mixture of sadness and relief. She had divorced Brad some time ago. The shame had been too much. The legal bills had taken the house, the savings, everything. She had to start over. You okay? Her partner asked, squeezing her hand. Yeah, Lisa smiled weakly. I'm okay. It's good to see something good come out of all that hate. She turned away, walking back to her car. She hadn't visited Brad in a while. The last time she went, he was a shell of a man, paranoid, broken, talking to himself about conspiracies. He was serving his time, but he was already gone. Back on the stage, Calvin finished his speech. He stepped down and was immediately swarmed by reporters. Mr. Brooks, do you have any comment on the news from the federal prison system regarding your accuser? A reporter asked, thrusting a microphone in his face. Calvin paused. He hadn't checked the news that morning. What news? Brad Jenkins was transferred to a maximum security medical facility yesterday, the reporter said. Reports say he suffered a severe mental breakdown. He's claiming he's still a police officer and is trying to arrest the orderlies. The circle of reporters went quiet, waiting for a reaction, waiting for Calvin to gloat, waiting for him to say, "Good." Calvin looked at the reporter. His expression didn't change. There was no joy in his eyes, only a solemn, heavy acceptance of the laws of cause and effect. "I pray for his family," Calvin said quietly, "and I pray he finds peace, but my focus is on the future. My focus is on ensuring that no one else has to go through what I went through to teach a lesson." He turned his back on the cameras and walked toward the young officers he had helped train. He shook their hands one by one. "Keep your eyes open," Calvin told a young rookie named Officer Alex Rivera. "Treat everyone with respect, even the ones you think don't deserve it, especially the ones you think don't deserve it." "Yes, sir," Rivera said, beaming. Calvin walked to his car, not the black Mercedes sedan anymore, but a sensible American-made SUV. He got in, checked his mirrors, and pulled out onto the road. He drove past the highway on-ramp for U.S. Highway 59. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The rearview mirror was clear. The road ahead was open. And for the first time in a long time, the flashing lights in the distance were just lights. Not a threat, but a reminder that the watchmen were finally being watched. That is the story of how one man's arrogance collided with another man's dignity, and how the fallout changed a city forever. It's a reminder that no one is above the pay grade of karma. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It helps us create more long-form dramas like this one. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode. And tell me in the comments, do you think 25 years was enough, or did Jenkins get off easy? I read every comment. In the end, this story leaves us with a powerful truth that cuts straight to the heart. No matter how much power you think you hold, no matter how untouchable you believe you are, arrogance always meets its match in quiet dignity. Brad Jenkins wore a badge like armor, convinced it made him invincible. But in a single moment on that lonely Texas highway, he learned the hardest lesson life has to offer. Respect isn't something you demand through fear or force. It's something you earn through character. When you look at another human being and see only what fits your prejudice instead of who they truly are, you don't just risk destroying them, you end up destroying yourself. Calvin Brooks didn't need to raise his voice or fight back with fists. He simply stood in his truth, and the weight of justice did the rest. That's the quiet power we should all carry: integrity, patience, and the courage to do what's right even when no one is watching. Life has a way of circling back around. The very shovel you use to try and bury someone else can become the tool that digs up every secret you thought was safely hidden. Karma doesn't always knock loudly. It often arrives wearing flashing lights in your rearview mirror. So the next time you feel tempted to judge someone by the car they drive, the color of their skin, or the confidence in their stride, remember Brad Jenkins on his knees on that welcome mat, watching everything he valued crumble because he refused to see the man in front of him. True strength isn't in the badge or the gun. It's in treating every person with the dignity they deserve, because one day the roles could so easily reverse. If this story touched something deep inside you, if it made you pause and reflect on how you show up in the world, drop a comment below and tell me, what's the most important lesson you've learned about respect and consequences? Which part hit you the hardest? I read every single one. And if you want more powerful, thought-provoking stories like this that stay with you long after the screen goes dark, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our growing family. Let's keep learning and growing together. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.